I discovered my ex-wife's affair the day she was admitted to the hospital, and now, years later, she can't accept that I'm engaged to my fiancé. If there were a prize for the most horrible way to learn of your significant other's affair, I would probably win it and be in its Hall of Fame. Like so many people who find themselves members of this unwanted club, I was thrust into it suddenly and painfully. The memory of my ex-sister-in-law's voice is something I will never forget. She kept repeating, I'm sorry, over and over on the phone while I drove home from a week-long business trip. Confused and with no idea what she meant, I managed to calm her down somewhat. Only then did she inform me that my wife was in the hospital and that I needed to hurry home. My mind went into overdrive as I tried to get more information without crashing my car. I began speeding, desperate to get there faster. She only told me it was an assault before abruptly cutting the call and refusing to answer when I tried to call her back. For a bit of background, my ex and I met in our mid-20s through a mutual friend at a barbecue. She seemed almost too good to be true. Not only was she incredibly beautiful, but she was also shy and introverted. It took a while for us to officially start dating, but once it happened, I was over the moon. When we first tried to get intimate, she suddenly started crying. I should have taken this as a bad sign. I freaked out, thinking I had done something wrong, but she apologized the next day and told me she had been triggered. It turned out that 2 years before meeting me, she'd been in a long-term relationship with an abusive guy who mistreated her emotionally, physically, and mentally. He would degrade her during their moments of intimacy and then apologize afterward. She had a flashback, but reassured me it had nothing to do with me. So we took things slow as she continued her therapy. It was tough, but because I loved her, I believed that overcoming this would make our relationship stronger. For a while, it honestly seemed that way. Fast forward another year, and we got engaged. During this time, we also experienced our first true intimacy. I was fortunate enough to be able to buy a house for us, courtesy of an inheritance from my late uncle. Things were going great, and I had suggested we plant a peach tree to signify new beginnings. She loved the idea. We got married not long after, and quite frankly, it was absolutely amazing. Of course, we had our normal ups and downs like every married couple, but I considered us lucky because she always made it a point to never go to bed upset with each other. She would gently point out if I did anything to upset her. Sometime later, life happened, and I was promoted at my job. The promotion meant more pay, but it also meant I would be traveling more for work conferences and business meetings. I noticed she had been getting down a lot more and wasn't as intimate as before. She kept her phone close and stopped gently addressing things that upset her. I tried to talk to her about it, but she assured me that she was fine and just going through a phase. Having no reason to distrust her, I let it go. She would sometimes go to her sister's place and spend the night, telling me she just needed a bit of girl time. The day I got that fateful phone call was supposed to be another one of those nights. I remember rushing into the hospital, barely breathing, frantically asking about my wife. One of the world's most understanding and patient police officers sat me down to explain what had happened. He told me he was a friend of my sister-in-law and had responded to a domestic disturbance call. When he arrived on the scene, he found a couple fighting. The supposed boyfriend was on top of the female, punching her as she screamed and tried to scratch him. This made no sense to me. 1. This had nothing to do with my wife because we were married. And 2. Everyone who knew my wife knew she wouldn't do that. The officer gave me a knowing look, placed his hand on my shoulder, and told me to remain calm because the girlfriend was actually my wife. If it weren't for the severity of the situation, I might have laughed in his face, but something in the way he explained everything made me believe him. A nurse then ushered me in to see my wife. What greeted me is something I can hardly find the words to describe, even to this day. I stood there for what seemed like an eternity until a doctor came in and explained her injuries. Her jaw was slightly fractured, her left eye completely swollen shut, massive bruising covered half of her face, and she had 3 broken ribs. Then the doctor dropped another bomb. She was pregnant. I still couldn't understand how this had happened. Then I caught sight of her sister. At first, she tried to avoid me, but with the persuasion of her police officer friend, she told me what she knew. It turned out my wife's ex had gotten in contact with her 5 months ago. He was doing this redemption pyramid step thing where he would apologize to people he had wronged in order to clear his karma. Anyone else's BS meter going crazy right now? They began talking more, and he convinced her to meet up for coffee and show her how much he had changed. He was a changed man, or so he claimed. Obviously, old feelings resurfaced, coupled with the fact that he appeared to have genuinely changed. This soon developed into an emotional affair. My wife approached her sister for advice, and she told her to take things slow and get it out of her system if she needed to. This advice led to a physical affair 3 months later. Her sister even suggested that my wife should make peace with her ex in whatever form that might take, and offered to cover for her once in a while. At this point, my sister-in-law was in tears, repeatedly apologizing to me. She didn't know about the abuse, as my wife had never told anyone other than me and her therapist. I was numb, absolutely dumbfounded by my wife's actions. When my wife finally woke up, I was there, and she burst into tears upon seeing me. I spent the following months in a zombie-like state, operating on autopilot. There was individual counseling for her and marriage counseling for us, strongly urged by her family. In counseling, she was surprisingly forthcoming about what had happened and expressed how much she hated herself for causing me pain. She mentioned that at one point, on her way home from his place, she actually fantasized about driving into a river because she smelled like him and didn't want his scent to corrupt me. However bizarre that sounded, it made a twisted kind of sense. She said she had tried to end it but was too weak. Only after learning she was pregnant did she realize that any further contact with this man was toxic to her and the unborn child. She went to end things in person for good when he snapped on her. She became a shell of herself and developed a phobia of any males except me. At one point, she couldn't even use the bathroom at night unless I was holding her hand. It was incredibly sad. After our son was born, we got a paternity test, and he was mine. Despite everything, the more time I spent with her, the more I realized I didn't hate my wife. I actually loathed her. I couldn't see the woman I married. Instead, I saw his leftovers every time I looked at her. I decided to leave because I was afraid I'd do something I'd regret and become exactly like her abusive ex. She begged me not to go and even made the ridiculous offer of giving me a hall pass or letting me slap her if I wanted to. At that point, I knew I had to get out. She was very generous during the divorce. She moved back in with her parents and signed a well-thought-out co-parenting plan issued by the courts. Fast forward 3 years, and I met my now fiancée by chance. I was in a bookstore with a buddy of mine discussing Egyptian mythology when this beautiful woman approached me to correct my pronunciations of the Egyptian gods and cities. I was immensely impressed by her understanding and the fact that she was Egyptian herself. We exchanged numbers, which eventually led to us dating. When I finally proposed to her, it was in front of the peach tree I had planted years ago. I got down on one knee, but before I got my answer, she ran into the house and came back with a ring. It turned out she was planning on proposing herself because she was madly in love with me and didn't want any other woman to have me. My son, in his sweet childlike innocence, told his mother what had happened because he was present when it occurred. That night, my ex showed up in the rain, yelling about how I could propose to my fiancé in front of our tree, and that this wasn't the end of us. I am completely exhausted. I cannot just ignore her because she is the mother of my child, but she is basically harassing me and my fiancé. How do I convince her to move on, get over her fear of men, and not force me to get a restraining order? Sorry this was long, but I am really desperate. Edit. I wanted to ask a question to the insightful women of Reddit. Something that still bugs me to this day is the fact that she even made time for her ex, who took pleasure in destroying her, only for her to suffer a much worse fate. Is it normal for the abused to want the attention of the abuser, even if she might hate him? Something my ex once said still echoes in my mind. When my fiancé presented me with the ring she was going to use to propose to me, it had an engraving on the inner band that read, "To my Pharaoh." Damn, I love this woman. I posted about discovering my wife's affair on the day she was admitted to the hospital, and how years later, she couldn't accept my engagement to my fiancé. I didn't expect such a response. Thank you all so much for your support and kind words, both for me, my fiancé, and even my ex. It's sad that my situation with my ex and her abusive past isn't as uncommon as I thought. Reading some of your similar cases really makes one almost lose hope, but it's heartening to see that some people have recovered from them. Now, for what has happened since my first post. First off, a big thank you to user Mama20245 for your simple yet amazing advice. It saved us a lot of trouble. Here's what has transpired so far. My son's birthday was coming up, and he told us he wanted to have a camp night for it. I must explain that the boy absolutely loves the outdoors. Everything from camping to hiking to playing in rivers is his favorite. Due to the ongoing situation, we couldn't go to our usual spots, so I offered my backyard for it. Another request he had was for my ex to sleep over as well. He wanted to imitate a scene from one of his kid adventure shows, where both parents sit on either side of the child, and all three roast marshmallows by the campfire. I had no intention of denying my son's birthday wishes, but at the same time, I couldn't have my ex sleep in the same tent as me and my son. That would be far too disrespectful to my fiancée, even though she said she understood. It was clear my fiancée wasn't okay with the arrangement, and my ex seemed to take advantage of this. She kept talking about how much she was looking forward to spending the night with her two men, even going so far as to buy an array of camping equipment that would put Bear Grylls to shame. She was certainly trying to rub it in my fiancé's face and wasn't graceful about it either. I had to tell her to stop a couple of times, but she only relented when I threatened to invite her sister. Since our divorce, my ex had developed a burning hatred for her sister. While my ex acknowledged her role in the destruction of our marriage, she blamed her sister for encouraging the affair and safeguarding her from making choices that would ruin her life. More importantly, she blamed her for ruining our life together. It had gotten so bad that she refused to let her sister spend any significant amount of time with our son, which at one point caused my sister-in-law to suffer severe depression. My sister-in-law had been trying for years to reconcile with my ex, but it only seemed to get worse as time went on. A Redditor, Mama202245, offered a simple and effective solution: purchase a multi-room tent so that my fiancé could be included without awkwardness. I wasted no time and immediately went out to get one. Of course, my ex wasn't too happy about that, but she was glad to be under the same roof as me during the birthday celebration. My son was on cloud 9, running around the yard and pretending he was a great explorer discovering new land. When evening came, I made the fire, and my ex provided the marshmallows. He excitedly sat between us and started roasting his marshmallows alongside us. The joy on his face was priceless, and for a moment, all the tension melted away as we focused on making his birthday special. What I didn't expect was that after we were done taking pictures and making s'mores, my son handed my fiancée a stick and a marshmallow, then sat next to her to make his second s'more. It's honestly a mystery how something so pure and perfect could come out of the absolute mess that was my relationship with my ex. My ex asked for a bit of my time, and I obliged. We stepped into the kitchen, where she apologized for her behavior on the day I proposed, but not for her actions afterward. She told me she still sees me as her husband in her mind, so the thought of me giving my heart to another terrified her. She said she never wanted to cause me pain and would give anything to go back in time and undo her mistakes. She mentioned how happy she was when the paternity test showed that I was the father because she thought it was a new beginning for us and that our son was proof of our love. I thanked her for the courage to share all this, but told her I was happy with where I was in life and with whom I was with, and hoped she would find someone to make her happy as well. She said she meant what she told me on the day we divorced and would wait for me. I left the kitchen feeling exhausted because nothing I was trying to say got through to her. We decided to call it a night, with me and my fiancé sleeping in one room of the tent and my ex with my son in another. All in all, it was a good birthday for my son, but not so great a night for me. That's how things stand so far. I promise to update if anything major happens.